When the mediator is very close, observers can see the hero's psychological circle and speak of obsession. The man obsessed is like a fortress surrounded by the enemy. He is forced back on his own resources. Legrandin eloquently stigmatizes snobism. Bloch rages against social climbing, and Charles against homosexuality. Each one speaks only of his own vice. The obsessed man astounds us with his clear understanding of those like himself, in other words, his rivals, and his complete inability to see himself. This lucidity and blindness both increase as the mediator becomes nearer. The law of the psychological circle is basic. It is found in all the novelists of imitative desire. Among the brothers Karamazov, Ivan is most like his father and Alyosha least. It is Ivan who hates most and Alyosha who hates least. We have no difficulty in discovering the two Proustian ladders in these relationships. The psychological circle can be found in Cervantes as well. It is those who are most inclined to the ontological sin who attempt to cure Don Quixote. The sickest persons are always the most worried by the sickness of others. After cursing others, Oedipus finds he himself is guilty. Novelistic psychology is even more banal than French avant-garde critics deem it. In its best moments, it returns to the psychology of the great religions. Therefore, thou art inexcusable, O man, whosoever thou art that judgest. For wherein thou judgest another, thou condemnest thyself. For thou that judgest doest the same things. St. Paul's Epistle to the Romans. The springtime of society which awakens in the heart of a young snob is no more despicable in itself than other desires, but our psychological circle creates the illusion of a fundamental difference. We do not all secretly dream of the Faubourg Saint-Germain, but we are particularly hard on snobs because they inhabit the same historical world as we do. We are hostile to the bourgeois forms of metaphysical desire because we see in them the desires of our neighbors and the grinning caricature of our own temptations. Not to understand the snob and not to understand a Dostoevskian character are two quite different things. In the first case, it is a lack of sympathy. In the second, a lack of comprehension. We do not understand what drives the underground man to worship, to hate, to collapse sobbing at the feet of his mediator, to send him incoherent messages full of insults mixed with endearments. On the other hand, we understand very clearly the temptation to which Gilbert yields when she writes to the Duchess of Gramont. However unjustifiable the snob's imitation seems to us, it is nevertheless much more justifiable than that of the Dostoevskian hero. The snob's values may perhaps not be ours, but they are not so unfamiliar that they elude our grasp completely. The proof of this is that we think ourselves always capable of smelling out a snob. We see through his affectation of spontaneity and eccentricity. We can guess at the phenomena of literary and social disease that have infected him. We perceive the inadequate props he seeks in history, aesthetics, and poetry. We are not fooled by his excuses, his irresistible sympathy, or, on the other hand, by the cynical ambition with which he tries to conceal the ineffable, irrational, yet familiar essence of snobism. It is always the most familiar forms of imitative desire which excite indignation. Don Quixote's neighbors are no less brutal and unjust in their narrow-minded justice than Marcel's father when he condemns Legrandin. In the eyes of his peers, the petty squires, Don Quixote is merely a snob. He is reproached for having assumed the title of Don, to which he has no right. Sancho too acts like a snob when he tries to persuade his wife that she should be a duchess. The great novelists share neither our indignation nor our enthusiasm for their creations. They seem to us either too indulgent or too cruel because of our own passion. Cervantes looks on Don Quixote in the same way that Proust regards Baron de Charles. If we cannot recognize the analogies between all these heroes, it is because we are sometimes in the shoes of Marcel's severe parents and sometimes in those of the indulgent grandmother, depending on the proximity or remoteness of the heroes. We must overcome the irritation which snobism causes in us. We cannot reach the standpoint of novelistic unity until we have traveled the road taken by the novelists. After condemning others, the Oedipus novelist finds that he himself is guilty. Thus, he arrives at a position of justice beyond pessimistic psychology and romantic idolatry. This novelistic justice is distinct from moralizing hypocrisy and false detachment. It is something concrete, verifiable from the novel itself. And it is this which permits a synthesis of introspection and observation from which spring existence and truth. This synthesis, by destroying the barriers between the self and the other, creates the Don Quixotes and the Charles. It is not enough to show the relationship between the snob and other novelistic heroes in order to make Proust the equal of Cervantes and Dostoevsky. We still have to prove that the metaphysical significance of desire has not eluded him. This significance is very clearly stated in a passage of The Past Recaptured. Every person who makes us suffer we can associate with a divinity, of which that person is only a fragmentary reflection, the lowest step of the approach to the temple, as it were. And the contemplation of this divinity as a pure idea gives us instant joy in place of the sorrow we were suffering. Such passages are not lacking, and we could simply go on quoting them, but compared with the metaphysical vision of Dostoevsky, they are so many meager and isolated sentences. Proust never emphasizes deviated transcendency to the degree that Dostoevsky or even Stendhal does, for he does not probe so deeply into the question of freedom as does the latter. As we have seen above, Proust frequently adopts, or seems to adopt, a solipsistic theory of desire which completely falsifies the experience of his characters. The mediator's divinity is central to novelistic genius. Thus, it should be expressed at that precise point where the art of an individual novel triumphs. Where is this point in Proust? If we should ask the author himself, he would reply that novelistic art, and it is understood Proustian art, reaches its culmination in the creation of metaphors. The metaphor, therefore, should reveal the metaphysical significance of desire. And this is precisely what it does. In Proust's masterpiece, the sacred is not merely another metaphoric domain, it is present whenever the author deals with the relationship between the subject and his mediator. The whole gamut of feelings experienced by the narrator before his successive idols corresponds to the various aspects of a religious experience in which terror, anathema, and taboos play an increasing role. The images and metaphors portray the mediator as the relentless guardian of a closed garden, where only the elect may enjoy eternal beatitude. See, for example, the passage on Bergot quoted above. The narrator always approaches his God in fear and trembling. Thanks to the images, the most insignificant gestures take on a ritual value. Accompanied by his nursemaid, Francois, Marcel makes a pilgrimage to the Swan residence. This bourgeois apartment is in turn compared to a temple, a sanctuary, a church, a cathedral, an oratory. There is scarcely a cult from which Proust has not borrowed sacred terms. Magic, occultism, the primitive world, and Christian mysticism are never absent. The vocabulary of transcendency is extraordinarily rich in this author, who never, or almost never, speaks of metaphysics and religion.